Hello everyone, my name's James. As Kasia said, I've flown all the way from New Zealand. Has anyone heard of New Zealand? Has anyone been to New Zealand? Anyone? Fuck, none of you have been to New Zealand. Oh, there's one! Congratulations. Love that. They said there's no water on stage, so I hope you don't mind. I bought my Coke. So I'm going to talk to you today. I'm going to show you some stuff that's going to completely reframe the way that you think about marketing. I'm going to talk to you about how markets work, what that means about how marketing works and advertising works, and why it works that way. So prepare Romanians to have your minds melted. Are you ready? Yeah? Yeah? All right. Let's do it. I'm going to start with a question. Who is currently in the process of buying a new mobile phone or thinks they will do so in the next couple of weeks? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Any more? 7, 8. All right, very good. I want you to put your hand up if you expect to buy a new mobile phone in the next 2 years. Oh, you see any difference between those two groups? Yeah, one's a lot bigger than the other. I do this thing to make a really simple point, which is that in any market, there's two types of demand. There's what I call current demand, which is people who are in the market right now and ready to buy. And that's the small group of 8 or so hands that went up when I asked the first question. And there's another type of demand, which I call future demand, which is people who are not looking to buy yet, but who will definitely come into the category at some point in future. And as our extremely scientific experiment just showed, the group of people who are currently in the market is always a lot smaller than the group of people who aren't yet in the market but will come into the market at some point in future. Here's some data. This is future demand of mobile phones in the US, as we can see. Americans say, about 15% of them say that they reckon they'll buy a new mobile phone in the next month. The other 85% are future demand. They will buy a new mobile phone, but they'll do so at some point over the next months or years. Here's sneakers. Americans buy sneakers a bit more than they buy mobile phones, and so there's a bit more current demand in the market, 26%, but still the much bigger group is people who will buy sneakers beyond the next month. Here's international air travel, 19% current demand, 81% future demand. Here's beer. Only 37% are going to buy beer this week, even though people buy lots of beer and they buy it all the time. Still, most of the market will buy beer later. Here's shampoo and conditioner, 26% current demand, 74% future demand. This is how markets work, right? This is how categories work. There's always a small amount of people in the category at any given time, and there's a much larger group of people who are going to come into that category at some point in future. Now, we've got a job to do with both of these groups. So the job we've got to do with these folks is pretty clear, right? We need to get them choosing us rather than our competitors. They're in the market, they're looking to make a decision. We've got a really different job to do with this much bigger group. And really step one of that job is to make sure that those people feel really familiar with our brand. Not to get them to buy right now, but to get them to feel really familiar with our brand. Because when people come into markets, they gravitate towards the brands that they feel the most familiar with. Right? All of us, our human brains, have a familiarity bias. We bias towards things that we're more familiar with. People and brands and places and all sorts of things, right? We have a familiarity bias. It lives in our reptilian brain, the old part of the brain that developed first. It biases us towards things that we're familiar with. In the sciences, they call it the mere exposure effect. The idea that we tend to like things, choose things, be drawn towards things merely because we've been exposed to them in the past. And this is one of the reasons that Coca-Cola does this, right? They brand every convenience store all over the world. It's partly to remind people when they're going to the store that they might like a Coke and hopefully get them to buy one. It's mostly the act of continually topping up all of our familiarity with Coke, right? It's really hard for us to go a day in any city without coming across the Coke brand. It's really hard to do that in most cities. What Coke is doing here is familiarity infrastructure. They are making sure that the entire world always feels familiar with the Coke brand. And that's why, in a category with a very low cost of entry, they remain the market leader and have done so for such a long time. The marketing science agrees. The marketing science looks at it and sees that there's a much higher purchase intent for brands with higher brand familiarity. And so this is the job that we've got to do with that big group of people that are outside of the market and coming into it at some point in future. Because when we make people feel familiar with our brand before they enter the category, they're more likely to act on the marketing that we do to drive immediate sales, right? So we all do lots of marketing to try to get people to click here and buy now. And it could be the promotions we do, it could be the performance marketing that we do, all the activation stuff. We do lots of it. We do too much of it, by the way, but we'll get to that later. But when we've done the job of making those future demand customers more familiar with us, our short-term marketing works harder because we've primed them when they come into the category. Oh, I went backwards. And when we don't do that, we leave them susceptible to choosing someone else that they feel more familiar with. If another brand, a competing brand's done a better job of building up their familiarity among that future demand base, then those people are more likely to choose them. So we've got two equally important jobs, folks. One of them is converting current demand, getting as many of the small group of in-market people as possible to choose us and not our competition. We've got a second equally important job, which is creating future demand, warming up that much larger group of out-of-market people so that when they do come into the market, they gravitate towards us and they choose us. Now, how do I know that what I'm saying isn't bullshit? Here's some data from one of my companies, Tracksuit. Tracksuit is a brand health tracking software as a service startup. So we measure the awareness and consideration and preference of these sorts of things of now thousands of brands around the world. And we partnered up with TikTok. And we asked the TikTok marketing science team, if you combine our brand health data with your performance data on your platform, what can we see? Is there any correlation between something like awareness and performance metrics? Now, what we first found is zero correlation between brand awareness and click-through rate. So on TikTok, it doesn't matter if you're a brand with really high familiarity, a brand that everyone knows, or if you're a brand that no one's ever heard of before. If you do a cracking bit of content on TikTok, people will click on it, right? But we are not here to drive clicks, marketers, are we? There's no relationship between clicks and any sort of commercial outcomes. Click-through rate is a bullshit metric. Stop looking at it. It doesn't mean anything. What we are here to do is to drive conversions, right? Drive sales, like get people buying. What we saw in the data was a very strong correlation between brand awareness and conversion rate. What this chart shows is as brand awareness gets higher, conversion rate gets higher. And the brands with high awareness, like 60% or above, had around 3 times the conversion rate of brands with lower awareness. Conversion rate is not a factor of how good the performance marketing is. Conversion rate is a factor of how good the brand marketing is, right? It's a factor of how well we've done building up the awareness of our brand before that person comes into market, sees the performance ad, clicks on it, and hopefully buys our product. Okay, so now if we know these two things, we've got these two jobs to do: convert current demand, create future demand. They're both important. We need to be doing both of them. We need to be doing both of them all the time. What do we know about what's most effective at converting current demand in terms of advertising, and what's most effective creating future demand? So let's go back to our hands up thing that we did earlier, right? If you put your hand up to say you're in the market for a mobile phone, What that means is you're actively in the process of making a decision about what sort of mobile phone you're going to buy. And you, if you are one of those people, are really likely to read information like this, right? It's relevant to you. Product features and benefits and pros and cons and what people say about it and where you can get it and how much it costs and all that rational information stuff. If you're in the market for a mobile phone, it's really, really useful to you. It's absolutely relevant. You'll stop and read that. If you're not in the market for a mobile phone, unless you're weirdly obsessed with mobile phones, you're not going to read that information, right? You'll just filter it out. It won't connect with you at all. You need a different sort of advertising to grab your attention and leave a memory in your head about the brand. Here's another example. This is an ad for a truck, a commercial truck. It's a pretty normal ad. I've seen lots of ads like this before. A big picture of the product and a not very good headline and a bunch of guff about the product, right? There's nothing wrong with this ad. If you were in the market for buying a commercial truck, it's likely that you'd stop and read this ad. Is anyone in the market for buying a commercial truck? Nobody. But I bet you watched this.
I've had my ups and downs, my fair share of bumpy roads and heavy winds. That's what made me what I am today. Now I stand here before you. What you see is a body crafted to perfection, a pair of legs engineered to defy the laws of physics, and a mindset to master the most epic of splits.
Who can say where the road goes, where the day flows? Only time. And who can say if your love grows as your heart shows? Only time. We are there. We are
That's such a great film, right? Such a great piece of advertising. And a very, very effective piece of advertising. It won, the year after it ran, it won the Creative Effectiveness Grand Prix at the Cannes Lions Festival. They had 100 million views in the first year on YouTube. Sales increased 24%. That's quite a big increase for something like commercial trucks. The CEO was very happy with the performance of the campaign. What also happened was that Volvo's market share continued to rise for a long time after that ad ran, right? So I kept an eye on Volvo and Volvo trucks over the years that followed. And every year, their market share went up. And this is, sometime when I probably got bored of looking at them, but still in 2022, all-time high volumes of market share increase in 41 countries. What that ad did was it got noticed and watched by everyone who wasn't yet in the commercial truck market, but would come into that market at some point in the future over the next few years, right? It reached all of us. We all saw it and noticed it and watched it. And that's a waste of time because we're never going to buy a commercial truck. But it reached all of the people that would go on to buy commercial trucks. And it left such a strong imprint that the results of it have paid off for many years. It did the job of creating future demand. So two really different styles of communication. One that is more rational. It's talking to people in the market. It's not particularly creative, but it's a perfectly good ad for doing that job of talking to people who are in market. Another style of communication that's very, very different indeed. Creating future demand is essentially about planting positive memories of our brand in the heads of that huge group of future buyers. It's not to get them to click and buy. They're not in the market yet. That's a fool's game. It's to leave a memory imprint, leave them with positive memories about the brand that they retain when they come into the category so that they choose us. And that requires three things. It requires creativity, it requires emotion, and it requires reaching lots of people. So let's go through those things. What do I mean by creativity? I mean original ideas that are designed to engage people rather than simply to communicate at them. Those are a few examples. We know and have known for a very long time that ads that are highly creative, that have those creative qualities, are about 7 times as effective at growing market share over the kind of medium to long term than ads that don't have creative award-winning qualities. All right, we've known this for a long time. And why? Why is creativity so effective at building brands and creating those longer-term market share increases? Well, this group, current demand, they will pay attention to uncreative ads. People that are in the market will definitely pay attention to your uncreative, rational advertising because they're in the market. They want the facts and figures. It's relevant to them at the time. Creativity earns the attention of the people who aren't yet in the market, right? None of you are in the market for a commercial truck. I got that right? Why did you watch that ad? It's lovely. You shouldn't have watched that ad. It's a minute of your time wasted. You're never going to buy a commercial truck. What are you doing? You watched the ad because it was really creative, right? The creativity in the ad earned your attention. And that is why creativity is important when we're building brands. Creativity earns the attention of people who will come into the market later. You cannot earn their attention with rational, uncreative stuff. They'll filter it out, they won't notice it. You need creativity to earn the attention of that much larger group. Howard Gossage, does anyone know who Howard Gossage is? The Socrates of San Francisco, a great ad person from the 1950s and 60s. He said a great thing: nobody reads advertising, people read what interests them, and sometimes it's an ad. And he's quite right? And if people are in the market, what interests them is an ad for a product that's in that category. When they're not in the market, what interests them is not an ad for that product in that category unless it's really creative. It's creative enough to earn their attention. But here's the interesting thing. If we look at ads that drive immediate sales, that convert the current demand in the market, we actually see that uncreative ads are better at doing that than creative ads. Now, this makes complete sense, right? Because what I've just been telling you, when people are in the category, in the market, they don't need the big creative idea. They'll actually, if you just give them the information straight, they'll lap it up. So uncreative ads are good at converting current demand. So are rational ads. They're better than emotional ads for converting the current demand in the market. Give people the facts and figures. That's what's relevant to them. That's what they want. But emotional ads are better at every single other thing. Right? If we want to drive longer-term sales increases, if we want to drive market share, pricing power, loyalty, awareness, trust, differentiation, any of it, emotional content does a much better job than rational content. And why is that the case? Here's a quote I love from Maya Angelou. She said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And we know that to be true, right? Because we're humans. And it's true of people, but it's also true of brands. When we give people as a brand rational information, facts and figures and that sort of stuff, our human brain stores that in a different place to where it stores feelings. And the place where it stores facts has a very quick decay. What I mean by that is we forget those facts really quickly. If I give you a fact, you're unlikely to remember it tomorrow, certainly not the next day or the week after or when you come back into the market in 6 months' time. But if I make you feel a certain way, you do remember that. We just remember feelings. The bit of our brain that stores memories of feelings lasts much longer, decays much more slowly. So we remember feelings for much longer than we remember facts. And so this makes sense, right? Because if someone comes into the category in 6 months' time and we've advertised to them now, then we want to make sure that they remember whatever we've shown them. And the best way to do that is to make that emotional, because we store emotions in a part of the brain that lasts a long time. Emotional ads are particularly effective at increasing profits. Why is this? Because what we also know is that when people feel emotionally close to a brand, they are more willing to buy it when it's not on discount, to buy it if it costs a little bit more than the other brands, to buy it still if the brand puts its price up a little bit. And those small price advantages add up to big bottom line differences, right? That's why brands that connect emotionally tend to be more profitable than brands that only connect rationally. The other thing we need to do when we're creating future demand is target really broadly. If we target tightly, we reach the people that are in the market. We want to do that. When we're converting current demand, we want to target as tightly as possible. If we can only reach the people that are currently in the market, that's a really good thing to do. When we're creating future demand, we need to reach those big groups of all of those people that are going to come into the category at some point later, right? And algorithms and retail media and all that kind of stuff is useless at reaching all of those people because it only targets people that are actually likely to buy right now. We need broad targeting. We need TV and billboards and, you know, big ads and big screens and all of that kind of stuff to talk to a much broader audience. So we've got a nice little kind of recipe now for ads that convert current demand and ads that create future demand. The ones that convert current demand, rational, uncreative messaging, that works better. Calling to action, we want to get them to click here and buy now. That's what we want to do. And we want to use tight targeting to people that are in the market. Creating future demand, it's like the opposite, right? We want to use really creative, really emotional content. We're going not for an action, we're going for memorability. We need to judge our ads to create future demand on, will people really remember this? And we need to target really broadly to reach that much bigger group of as many of the buyers in the category now and future as we possibly can. And we kind of loosely think of these things as performance and brand. And building brand, doing brand marketing is really important, but there's been a lot of conjecture over the past 2 or 3 decades about whether brand is really that important anymore. So, hang on. You know, do modern companies really waste money on brand marketing? A lot of people think that these companies don't advertise and don't do kind of brand advertising or big, you know, budget advertising. Here's what these brands spent in 2022, I think, about the same in 2023. Billions of dollars, right? All of them. Google, nearly 8 billion, Facebook, 2.5, Amazon, 20, Netflix, 1.5, WeChat, 5, TikTok, $20 billion. Amazon spent in that year $2.6 billion just on linear television, right? So the idea that modern brands, digital companies, don't do brand marketing and should be completely performance-driven is complete bullshit. But here's how it started. So Jeff Bezos in the late 90s became famous for saying advertising is the price you pay for having an unremarkable product or service. If we fast forward to right now, Jeff's the world's largest advertiser. Nobody has ever spent $20 billion on advertising in a year. He's done it the last 3 years running, right? So maybe it was all that hair he used to have clouding his brainwaves, right? Do you think he'd say, we're no longer producing remarkable products at Amazon? Probably not, right? You know, he learned soon enough that the way to stay big and the way to grow even bigger was to use the power of advertising and the power of brand building. Now, for any of us that have studied advertising effectiveness and brand growth for a long time, comes as no surprise to us, right? This is data from Kantar's Brand Z initiative, and they've tracked the performance of the S&P 500, compared that to the performance of the strong brands in their portfolio of brands that they track, and the most powerful brands. And you can see there a really big difference between the performance of the average S&P 500 company and the companies that have built really strong brands, done great brand marketing. Now, this is really interesting. It tells us something interesting. If you look at S&P 500, this is a collection of companies that have very good fundamentals, right? The products are good, the service is good, the leadership's good, the financial management's good, the ops are good. You know, it's all good fundamentals. If you take those good fundamentals and you layer on top of them a really strong, emotionally resonant brand, you get a much better outcome. Right? The message here is not that brand makes up for fundamentals. It's not that you can have a shit product and just cover it up with a nice brand and that works. It doesn't. What brand does is it provides a kind of amplifier of strong fundamentals. It makes us much more profitable and much more successful in the long run. But we haven't done a great job of telling our non-marketing stakeholders this information. I spoke with Dara Tressida back when she was CMO of Peloton, and she said to me, marketing has not done a very good job of marketing. And it's cute, right? It's pithy, but it's also really true. We've often done a great job of marketing the products and the brands that we market. We've done a terrible job of marketing our discipline, how it works, why it works, what value it is, to non-marketing stakeholders. Too often, when a non-marketing stakeholder says to us, how does brand marketing add commercial value? Our answer is this. That's not a very good answer, is it? So I've spent a lot of time the last few years thinking about, like, how do we answer that question, right? And this is what I can kind of boil it down to. Brand marketing makes people who aren't in the market yet familiar with us and emotionally positive toward us. So when they enter the market, they gravitate toward us and pay more for us. That is the commercial argument for why brand marketing matters. Now, it's not one or the other. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying brand is important and performance is not, the long term's important, the short term's not. They're both equally important. It's both performance and brand that we need to be doing. We need to convert current demand and we need to create future demand, and we always need to be doing those things. But getting the balance right is a really important thing, right? How we balance these things, how we balance our budget, how much of the spend goes to performance or short-term activities, how much goes to brand or longer-term activities. Who's heard of the long and short of it? Okay, just the cool ones. So in the long and short of it, which is a very famous advertising effectiveness study done by Peter Field and Les Binet with IPA data back in 2013, they did this really interesting piece of data analysis which showed that companies that spent more than 50% on performance had lower, poorer business outcomes than companies that spent a little bit more on brand, right? They called it the 60-40 split. The optimal budget split between brand, creating future demand, and performance, converting current demand, is to spend 60% on brand, 40% on performance. Now, when this came out, it was a bit of a revelation. You know, we had data to prove that we shouldn't overspend on performance and we should still be great brand builders. But it wasn't actually a new piece of information. It's really interesting. If we go back to 1992, a guy called Peter Kim in New York did a very similar piece of research where he showed that companies that spent over 50% on promotion, back then in America, promotion meant performance marketing and advertising meant brand marketing. The companies that spent more than 50% on performance or promotion saw poorer overall marketing ROI than those that spent more than 50% on brand. If we fast forward to 2024, this is data from Analytic Partners, a global econometrics company. They say the same thing. What that confusing chart, which will be far too confusing for you to take in this presentation, but I'll share it with you later. What it says, though, is that if we spend over 50% on performance, we will see a poorer ROI than if we spend under 50% on performance. The reason that I'm telling you this is in marketing science, we like to talk about generalizable principles, right? What a generalizable principle is in science is we see the same pattern over and over again when we look in different data sets and different points in time and different categories and different markets. We see the same pattern coming through again and again. This is one of those generalizable principles. It doesn't matter if we're way back in 1992, if we're back in 2013, if we're today, the data all says the same thing, right? Don't spend more than half of your budget on short-term promotional activities or performance marketing. You will see a lower ROI, overall marketing ROI, if you do that, no matter how delicious it is to watch the performance marketing numbers come in and feel like we're doing a great job. Where usually, if we ladder up to an overall marketing ROI, we'll actually be diminishing our returns. Here's a story of a company that got the balance right. They shifted the right direction, Airbnb. Headlines came out, this was probably back in 2022 now, but Airbnb stock jumps after record earnings, first profitable year and a strong forecast. Airbnb credits optimized marketing strategy as it posts highest ever profits. So what was that optimized marketing strategy? It was Airbnb deciding to take money out of performance and put it into brand. They didn't stop doing performance. They still did plenty of stuff like the stuff on the left, but they moved lots and lots of budget into doing stuff that's more like the stuff on the right. You know, broadly targeted, large format, more emotional, more creative, less about the facts and figures and where it is and how much it costs, and more about forming a bond with the people that would come into the category over the following few months. Their CFO is on record saying we were right to shift spend from performance to brand building. Right? What they saw was much greater productivity, much better growth, much better overall marketing ROI. Now, this guy isn't the marketer justifying his decision, right? This is the chief financial officer of a major listed US entity, right? He's saying this because the numbers that he can report to the market show that making the transition from more performance focused to more brand focused was the right thing to do from a purely financial perspective. Here's a happy tale of a company that went the other way. So headlines from Nike last year, how Nike ran off course, why Nike's DTC, direct-to-consumer pivot didn't pan out, Nike is broken, can Elliott Hill fix it? If we go back to more like 2020, the headlines were a lot more optimistic. Why Nike is doubling down on its digital strategy. Nike's shutting down 9 wholesale accounts and shift to direct-to-consumer. Nike's CEO, digital is the new normal. And what happened back then, On Running and Hoka came along and started getting a bit of market share in the category, right? And they were doing really great, influencer and performance and social and all this kind of stuff, direct-to-consumer, all the stuff that you do when you're a small young brand. And it worked for them. And Nike looked at them and said, maybe we should market more like them. They seem to be driving better growth than us. Maybe we should market more like them. So they shifted a ton of spend into performance, influencer, social, all this kind of targeted stuff. To give them credit, they actually did a really good job of their influencer marketing. Right? They did a really, really solid job of influencer marketing. In 2024, they were ranked the top fashion brand for influencer marketing in the US. Do we think being named the top brand for influencer marketing correlates with commercial success? Does anyone know the answer to that? Yeah, also in 2024, digital sales down 20%, profit down 20% to the tune of $1 billion, market share down 2% to the tune of $7.6 billion, share price down 29%, wiping $30 billion off their enterprise value, and the CEO was fired. It's not that Nike didn't do a good job of their short-term sort of performance-y stuff. They did too much of it, right? They did too much of it. And this is exactly what the data tells us happens when you shift and you do too much short-term oriented marketing. The lesson here, if you market like a smaller brand, you will become a smaller brand, right? At the moment, we live in a world where there's lots and lots of new competition from little players and lots of different categories. They're coming along, they're doing lots of the stuff that they can afford to do. They can't afford to do the TV and the big creative ideas and the big outdoor and all of that kind of stuff, so they do what they can afford to do. And they grow a little bit. You can performance market your way to about 3% market share in any category, right? Getting past that gets really hard. But what I'm seeing all over the world at the moment is big companies who say, maybe we ought to market more like these little companies. And it's a disaster, right? Because if you market like a smaller brand, you will become a smaller brand. So don't do that. I want to finish on a story that I love telling. It's a story that was originally told by Jeremy Bullmore, who was one of the great British advertising thinkers of the past many years. And he wrote this in WPP's annual report one year. He said, many years ago, the late Len Heath, then in his mid-40s, sold his interest in an advertising agency and took me out to lunch. Afterwards, he offered to drive me back to my office. I protested. My office was no more than 10 minutes walk away, but Len insisted. And when I got to his car, I understood why. It was a shining, stunning, elegant, arrogant, latest model Aston Martin. It was the first time I'd been inside an Aston Martin, and it didn't disappoint. You may be interested to know why I bought this car, said Len. I bought it because I saw an advertisement for it. Well, fancy that, I said. But that's not the interesting bit, said Len. What's interesting is that I saw that advertisement when I was 14. It's such a nice story, right? And it reminds us of the fact that so much of the work that we do as marketers and advertisers pays off later, right? Now, most of us are fortunate to work in categories where later doesn't mean 30 years down the track, but so much of the work that we do ought to be in the service of building future demand, of talking to those people that are going to come into the category later, of leaving them with a positive feeling towards the brand, feeling really familiar with the brand. That's really important. That's how we drive sustained growth, not just short-term little spikes in sales, but sustained growth over time. We need to come back to creative, emotional, broadly targeted advertising that reaches, connects with, earns the interest of all of those people who will come into the category later. So I hope you do that. That's my talk. Thank you very much for having me in Romania. It has been a treat.